Between work deadlines, endless business trips, and the awkward pauses that linger too long, Mr. Something remains unspoken. Hone seems perpetually busy, always on the move, always leaving, always heading somewhere else. Yet behind every absence lies a secret he has never dared to reveal to James and Deep. Routine tries to disguise the truth, covering it with schedules, responsibilities, and polite conversations. But one question hangs stubbornly in the air. What is he really hiding, and how much longer can it remain in the shadows? The sound of the engine cutting through the early morning silence signaled another departure. James stood beside Deep for a few seconds longer than necessary, as if trying to memorize that simple, fragile moment before reality pulled him away again. Commitments could not wait. Work was calling. In his calendar, business trips piled up one after another, just like the worries he preferred not to voice aloud. Deep watched him leave from the doorway, knee clinging to her leg. The little girl raised her hand and smiled, unaware of the invisible weight settling in the adults' chests. When the car disappeared down the dusty road, the house suddenly felt larger and colder. Deep exhaled softly and returned to her routine. She cleaned, cooked, and tended to the animals, simple tasks that helped her organize not only the house but also her thoughts. Meanwhile, James moved through gray cities and sterile meeting rooms filled with serious faces. Conversations revolved around contracts, deadlines, and numbers, leaving no room for the heart. In every hotel room, in every airport terminal, the same hollow feeling followed him. The farther he traveled, the more vivid the memory of Deep and Nee became, but his soul longed for stillness. Modern life demanded speed. During one of those trips, he received a brief phone call from his mother. Her voice sounded tired. Between carefully chosen words, she dropped a sentence that unsettled him. His father had left again, another trip. That habit of leaving in silence was not new, but now it hurt more than ever. James frowned. No explanation. What was his father hiding? Why did he always choose silence? Back home. Deep felt the same unease growing quietly inside her. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones. Curious glances lingered longer than before, as if everyone knew something she didn't. Some evenings, she sat by the fire thinking about family, about how difficult it is to accept someone when the past weighs heavier than the present. Distance, travel, and unspoken words began to weave an invisible net around them. As in everyday life, it wasn't the big conflicts that hurt the most, but the small silences that stretched on endlessly. And while each of them continued with their routines, a truth waited patiently for the right moment to surface. Dawn arrived slowly, dragging cold air through every crack in the house. A thin layer of fog covered the fields, and the sharp chill made every breath visible. Deep sat by the fire, stretching her hands toward the flames, watching them dance with a soft, almost hypnotic sound. Life moved forward with a calm that seemed ordinary, yet beneath it lay a fragility as thin as glass. James was there beside her, sleeves rolled up, hands still stained with dirt. They had spent the morning working together, digging small holes for the chickens' water. Moving heavy stones, improvising simple solutions to protect the animals from the cold. Small gestures, almost insignificant, yet filled with a quiet intimacy that only grows when two people share exhaustion and routine. Nee wandered nearby, taking clumsy steps on the damp earth. Sometimes she stopped to watch a chicken. Sometimes she simply stood still, as if the world was too big to understand all at once. Her presence filled the space with unexpected warmth. James couldn't help but smile every time he looked at her, and Deep noticed, though she said nothing. In that shared silence, everything seemed in its place, and yet, beneath the calm, something stirred restlessly. Deep thought about the previous day, the moment she couldn't find Nee, and fear tightened around her chest. Followed by relief when she learned the child had gone out with James's father, a stern, distant man who rarely showed emotion, yet had laughed with the little girl. That image lingered in her mind like an unanswered question. James stared toward the horizon, pretending to focus on his work. He knew this peace wouldn't last. Business trips, responsibilities, and above all, his father, these were shadows that never fully disappeared. That strong, respected man continued to carry something deep within himself, something even his own son could not fully understand. Chickens clucked. The fire kept burning. Life moved on at its slow rhythm. But in the middle of that cold, seemingly ordinary day, both felt that this peace was only a pause. As in life itself, it's often when everything appears stable that the most questions begin to surface. There are silences that make no sound, yet occupy all the space. That morning, Deep felt it clearly upon waking. The yard still covered in cold mist. The house was the same, and yet, something was different. Nee slept hugging her favorite doll. The silence had grown heavier, as if hiding a question no one dared to ask. James called early from a distant city. His voice sounded calm, but Deep, who had learned to read between the lines, noticed the exhaustion beneath every word. They spoke about simple things, the weather, Nee, the animals in the yard. Nothing deep. Nothing important, and yet, when the call ended, both were left with the same bitter feeling. What mattered most remained unsaid. As Deep prepared breakfast, she remembered Mr. Hone's gaze before his last trip. It wasn't anger she saw, but the look of someone carrying a story too heavy to share. Sometimes, in everyday life, the strictest people aren't the coldest. They're the ones who learned to protect themselves through silence. The thought unsettled her, but it also stirred compassion. Elsewhere, James walked alone down an unfamiliar avenue. The city's rush clashed sharply with the calm he craved. He thought of his father, years of firm decisions and clipped words. How many times had he wanted to ask questions, yet never dared? Growing up also meant confronting the uncomfortable questions one would rather avoid. That afternoon, Nee suddenly asked about her grandfather. Her innocent voice pierced Deep's heart. She didn't know how to answer. She smiled, hugged the child, and said he would return soon. Sometimes the smallest lies are born from a desire to protect. Like in so many families, calm is maintained while doubts quietly accumulate. When night fell, the sky filled with stars, indifferent to human conflicts. Deep lit the fire and thought about how often life tests us not with shouting, but with waiting. From his hotel room, James looked out the window and felt the same. Silence could unite or divide, depending on the courage one had to break it. And so, amid daily routines and unshared thoughts, the truth remained suspended in the air. Waiting for the exact moment when someone would finally dare to speak. There are moments in life when truth does not arrive with noise, but slowly, like dawn after an overly long night. Hone returned from his trip. The sky was gray and cold air crept into every corner of the house. The day mister from early morning, Deep sensed that something was about to change. James returned that same afternoon. The fatigue of work still weighed on his shoulders, but there was a new determination in his eyes, quieter. He didn't ask anything right away. More mature. Sometimes the heart needs a few moments to prepare before hearing what it has feared for years. Nee ran toward him laughing, and that simple gesture softened the tension in the air. His time-worn hands trembled slightly as he held a cup of hot tea. Hone watched in silence. For years, he had believed that silence was a way to protect his family. But seeing me, so small, so sincere, he understood that some truths, however painful, can also set us free. The conversation began without grand words. No shouting, no reproaches. Just short sentences, long pauses, and glances that spoke louder than speeches. Mr. Hone talked about past decisions, mistakes made in the name of responsibility, and the fear of losing control. Deep, seated beside him, felt each word fall slowly, like drops of rain on dry earth. James listened without interrupting. There was a moment of deep silence, one that hurts, but also heals. He didn't understand everything. James took a breath. He didn't fully agree, but for the first time, his father was no longer a distant shadow, he was a man full of contradictions. Deep gently squeezed James's hand, reminding him he wasn't alone, like anyone else. By nightfall, the atmosphere had changed. Not everything was resolved, but something essential had shifted. The truth had found its place. In everyday life, many families walk this path, between secrets and affection, waiting for the courage to speak. That night, as Nee slept peacefully, James realized that happiness doesn't always arrive when everything is perfect. But when, despite the cracks, people choose to stay and listen, this story reminds us that life is not built solely on work, responsibilities, and carefully guarded silences. We often believe that staying quiet is a way to protect those we love, but prolonged silence can become an invisible distance that slowly cools the heart. Mr. Hone spent years believing that hiding the truth was the best way to maintain family balance, without realizing that the same silence was quietly building walls between himself, James, and Deep. We also learn that true love isn't proven only through material sacrifice or long working hours. James traveled, worked, and struggled to secure his family's future, but it was when he chose to listen, to stay, and to face the truth that he began building a deeper happiness. Many people see themselves in him, chasing obligations without noticing that emotional presence often matters most. Deep represents patience and understanding. She didn't demand immediate answers or judge harshly. She knew how to wait, observe, and trust that time and honesty would bring clarity. Her attitude teaches us that understanding others doesn't mean accepting everything in silence, but accompanying them with both firmness and tenderness. Finally, Nee's presence symbolizes purity and hope. Children, with their sincerity, remind us of what truly matters. Family is not sustained by secrets, but by trust, dialogue, and affection. When adults learn to look each other in the eye and speak the truth, even the wounds of the past can begin to heal. The greatest lesson of this story is simple, yet profound. Only when we find the courage to speak with open hearts does everyday life stop feeling like a burden and become a shared journey, one filled with understanding, forgiveness, and genuine love.